Hello, my name's Kate Williams. I'm the acting editor of Mumsnet. Welcome everybody and thanks very much for coming. This session was slightly misleadingly titled Mumsnet Live in the programme, so if you've come expecting a real-life dramatisation of Am I Being Unreasonable, and I hope you do know by now that you probably are being unreasonable, I'm afraid huge apologies and please feel free to leave now. What we're actually going to be discussing in this session is parenting and equality. Astonishingly, Mumsnet is 15 this month. The site was launched in March 2000, so we're celebrating 15 years of women supporting one another in a place where everything from politics to parenting is up for discussion, and where mothers consult the wisdom of the crowd and hopefully discover that there's no right way to do parenting. That's always been at the heart of Mumsnet, and that hasn't changed. What also doesn't seem to have changed much over the last 15 years since Mumsnet was born is the fact that women are still shouldering the vast majority of the parenting burden. So today we want to try and unpack some of the really quite complex reasons that gender equality has failed to thrive in the parenting realm. And to help us do that, we have a quartet of brilliant women. Zoe Williams is a columnist for The Guardian and The New Statesman, where she writes political commentary, interviews and reviews. She's also the restaurant critic for The Sunday Telegraph and a regular guest on current affairs programmes. She has 2 children, one of which is in the audience today. Hello. And she's written frankly and often hilariously about parenting in 2 books, What Not to Expect When You're Expecting, and most recently in her polemic, The Madness of Modern Parenting. Victoria Smith is perhaps better known as Glosswitch. She works in publishing and moonlights on her own blog, Glosswitch, where her strapline is Humorless Mummy, Cuddly Feminist. She has 2 children, and as well as writing on her own blog, she writes frequently on parenting, feminism and politics for The New Statesman. She was shortlisted for the Editorial Intelligence Independent Blogger of the Year Award in 2013. On my right, an award-winning TV reporter and writer, Tazeen Ahmad has worked across all the major broadcasters, including ITN, NBC, the BBC, and most recently Channel 4. An investigative reporter for Dispatches, a former foreign correspondent, and a regular contributor to national newspapers. She's also the mother of 2 children and author of The Checkout Girl, a book about her time undercover in a supermarket during the recession. And Eleanor Mills, on the far right, is editorial director of the Sunday Times, and she's also chair of Women in Journalism. She writes a weekly column on social affairs in the news review section, as well as one in the home section about how we live now. And she was the winner of the International Alliance of Women World of Difference Awards for her contribution to the economic empowerment of women. And she appears regularly on TV and radio, and she has 2 children. So let's get started. Why are women left holding the baby still? We've made important strides towards gender equality. More young women travel through education and employment, managing to sidestep some of the more egregious injustices that face previous generations. They outperform boys in school. They match their male peers in terms of salary until they have their first child. Having your first child is a life-changing moment. It's wonderful in many ways, but it's also a moment when men and women's lives polarize quite dramatically. Feminism, we're kind of forced to admit, has not nailed family life. And this enduring inequality has far-reaching consequences, both for our lives as women and for society as a whole. So I'm going to leave time for contributions and questions from the audience at the end. But let's start with our panel. Zoe, do you recognise this sudden leap, this short, sharp shock of becoming a mother for the first time and suddenly realising that you're in quite a different realm in terms of equality as a mother?
Sorry, I've got this really authoritarian urge that makes me want to go and tell everybody in the Royal Festival Hall to stop enjoying themselves. It's like, oh, you, stop chatting, we're talking. I'm just fighting that. It's really interesting, isn't it? And I've been on panels before with young feminists who say discrimination no longer exists. You know, I'd like to see someone try and discriminate against me. And you kind of think, well, I really admire your brio, young lady, but you're blowing it out of your arse. There's a real there is absolutely no sense in which we've kind of made the advances we think we've made. What we've done is fix it for non-mothers to be equal, and that it's not just a perception, it is true. We've fixed kind of pay parity for non-mothers. And non-mothers would say that there are kind of cultural discriminations that they suffer, but in terms of the workplace, we've fixed all that. But since so much of the disparity between men and women was coming from maternity in the first place, the failure to make any real inroads into that period of your life is a failure of the entire project, as far as I'm concerned. You know, if you can't, after having children, return to the job you thought you were going to return to, then all the things we think we've done, we haven't actually done. I mean, do you want to know my personal thought of it? Okay. Because I work for The Guardian, right? You would think they were the most right-on people in the history of the world. You would think if anybody in the world understood what women needed after they went to have a baby, it would be the bloody Guardian. And it was unbelievable, you know. It was everything I had before I had children, what I no longer had once I'd had them. You know, every corner of the paper that I thought was mine had been given to someone else. And I was like, this is just extraordinary. And for probably 2 or 3 years after I had children, all I wrote about was children. And that was certainly not my choice. But that was, you know, in the kind of ducking and diving world of trying to find your place in a cultural machine, that was the only role I had left. And I think that, you know, if you can't in a kind of liberal organisation like that make it work, then we've got something really problematic going on.
Victoria, does that strike a chord with you? Did you step over a line from your pre-motherhood life into a very different world?
Yes, very much so. And I think it really changed my perception of feminism and what it means and what it's for, because I think when I was younger, I always felt I was a feminist and I always believed in feminist aims, but I thought one of the aims was to liberate us from motherhood, to liberate us from the motherhood role. And that meant I kind of, in my head, swept it under the carpet and didn't want to think about, you know, becoming a mother and the practicalities, because that would just suggest some traditional image of motherhood and a traditional image of womanhood to people. And I think when I was pregnant, I think I found when I was pregnant, lots of people just want to patronise you all the time, particularly people who already are mothers, and they're telling you how awful it is, and you get a bit defensive, and you're like, no, it's going to be fine for me, I'll sort it. And I do have a partner who's really into sharing the work, and he takes on an awful lot, but it still completely changes. And I think now my kids are 5 and 7, and I'm expecting a third baby, and my attitude's completely different. It's I look at women who've decided not to have children, and I see that they have opportunities that I don't have and that I've chosen. Well, it feels like I've chosen to cut them off in the scenario that we're in, because there's no other way around it, and that you have to be realistic. And well, no, you have to fight for change, but being realistic, motherhood does really exclude you. And it's not just in practical terms, in terms of you need flexibility with work, it changes people's attitude towards you. I found that when I went back to work, even like the jokes people thought I'd find funny had changed because I was a mother, and you don't say that in front. And you know, it's expectation you're more conservative, an expectation you won't want to do this and you won't want to do that. And it's very hard to say, I'm still the same person, I've still got the same interests, I've still got the same politics. But all of that changes so much, and you don't seem to have a say in it.
Tazeen, what about you? Did you feel like you stepped over a line into a different world? Or?
Oh, completely. And it's both depressing and heartening to hear Zoe's and Victoria's experiences so similar to mine. When I was working at the BBC for about 11 years, and I just sort of decided in my early 30s that I was going to now have children, and didn't really think very much about what impact that would have in terms of my professional life. And I had my first child 10 years ago, and then sort of thought I'd just come back to work. And actually things changed at the BBC around the same time. And when I started to Google, you know, trying to find a childminder who would look after my child at 2 a.m. so that I could pick him up on my way back after I'd finished presenting the programme I used to work on, I realised that I actually had to leave. And there was no conversation at the time with the BBC about a sort of back to work, you know, strategy, which I feel really strongly there needs to be mandatory across all organisations for women who have children. And so I decided to leave, and I offered to take voluntary redundancy, and it wasn't a particularly difficult decision. But after that, I found that every sort of single career decision I've made because it's my decision, and there's been no real support and nothing from organisations that I've worked for to say, how do we make this work for you? I've had to carve out how I would make it work. And it's worked well, but it's been a struggle, and it's been with the support of my partner that I've managed to make it work. And if it hadn't been, I'm not quite sure how I would have done any of it. But and I think part of that is because maybe it's because I'm of Pakistani origin. Maybe it's because I grew up in sort of racist Britain in the 70s and 80s. Maybe it's because my mother is a single mother. My parents divorced, and so my mother raised me on her own with my brothers during our teen years. That I never expected to have anyone look out for me, so I had to look out for myself. But I think that's utterly unacceptable. I think your experience, Zoe, and it's utterly unacceptable. We should be able to go back to those jobs, and we should be able to pick up where we were, and we should be able to do more interesting things because we are now mothers and bring so much more to the table, and we should have career progression. It shouldn't be that we cut ourselves off and then try and find new ways to move forward. I think that's unacceptable.
Ellen, does this resonate with you?
Yes, kind of yes and no, because I had my kids when I was quite young. I was 31, which relatively now is quite young, and by that point I was already quite senior within the organisation. So, and maybe it helped being on a right-wing paper, but there are not that many women around where I work, so they can't really afford to lose the ones that they've got. So I actually found that the Sunday Times were very helpful to me. I mean, I was in a big executive, and they let me work at home on a Wednesday, and I only did a half day on a Monday, and I found that having that day at home in the middle of the week made all the difference. I think otherwise I would definitely have resigned. But it meant that I could kind of take my daughters to baby music or kind of and take them to school and kind of be part of the community. And I felt that I was more present, because I at that point I used to have to work till 2 a.m. every Friday. So and when I look back now, that whole time is a total blur. My kids are now 12 and 9. And when people talk to me about when they were little, I think I was so exhausted trying to do both things. And I think if I'd had my kids now, like a lot of my contemporaries have done in their early 40s, I don't think I could possibly have done it. I mean, I'm someone with a lot of energy anyway, and I really loved what I was doing, and I was very determined to make it work. And I was also the main breadwinner in my family, so I think that some of the kind of more systemic things around male and female roles didn't really apply. My husband was working for a .com startup, so he was much more flexible, and he did a lot of the kind of hands-on childcare. And if there was a choice between who was going to work and who wasn't going to work, I had to go to work because I paid the mortgage. And I think, I mean, at the time that felt like a bit of a burden, but actually I think the reason why I've had the career that I have had was because that my career was prioritised within the family. And when I look at friends who are married to very high-flying lawyers or that kind of thing, I mean, in a way, the more successful the husband, the more likely the woman to be on the mummy track. And so I would actually think that in some ways, if you're very serious about your career and you want to be a mum, you want to marry a different kind of man. No, I mean, but I think
know, but you don't always think of that.
No, you don't necessarily think of that. But
I mean,
I'm very. I mean, I didn't really intend to do that, but that was kind of that was who I fell in love with. And actually, that was a really good option. And there was a much more high-powered man who I could have married. And I'm very glad that I didn't. You know, really, 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 it would have been a disaster. So I think that's quite an important message to send out to our kids. I mean, and to younger women, that you do have to choose who you marry carefully. It is also about it's a partnership, and it's about what you value doing. And I think I feel very depressed when I go and speak to lots of very, young women. It's like Zoe's feminists who think the whole thing's been sorted out. And you just want to say, look, darling, it's completely fine in your 20s. Yes, young women are out earning young men now, but as soon as you have a baby, all bets are off. And that's still the same. So, and I think it's very true that we all have to find our own ways through it. But one of the things which is interesting, I think, is that a lot of companies are realising that all this money that they put into training up young solicitors or female doctors or whatever it is, goes completely to waste if they all fall out of the kind of management tree in their 30s when they have kids. So a lot of the big merchant banks, actually, and the management consultants are now doing back to after baby kind of maternity mentoring, to help keep women on track. I mean, I think there is a kind of move that they've got to do this, partly because it's now 50-50 or more in most of the professions of women coming in, and they can't afford to lose that much of the workforce. So maybe there is some hope.
Before we talk about work, which is obviously like a really kind of core area, and you know, women having babies makes a huge impact on their work life. Let's stick with the home for a little bit, and work out how parenting equality works or doesn't work at home. Zoe, to what extent do you think parenting equality is bound up with the equal division of the kind of endless domestic drudgery that starts as soon as your baby exits the womb, and from what I can work out, goes on for the next 18 years?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because it kind of completely goes off a cliff. 1 minute you're pregnant and you do equal amounts, and that, in my case, that was like equal amounts of nothing. We were both completely slovenly and never did anything. So why would we argue? You know, sure, there's curry from last week on the table. Well, who's arguing? And then it completely goes, you know, you've got a baby and you're doing everything. And I remember being so angry with my husband because he just said really casually, "Oh, I've got to go to Stavanger next week." And I was like, and I felt I was kind of lurching around the room like a concussed bull, because I was just so furious that he could just pick up the phone and go, "Yeah, all right, I'll go to Norway." I just couldn't believe that that kind of freedom still existed for him, whereas at that point I couldn't imagine ever being able to go to the end of the streets ever again. And then, so you kind of go off the cliff, and then you slowly kind of claw back your independence, really inch by inch by inch over a period of a decade, really. And then your kids are 10, which mine aren't, but then your kids are 7, and it's all a bit more equal. But it's never that equal, and you never really, I don't think, get over that early fury. It does kind of change the way you are with each other. But you know, I remember having a meeting with the EOC as it was, and I didn't have kids then, and the head of it said, "We really need to work on the chores gap." And I thought it was the most pathetic thing I'd ever heard, you know, because I didn't even understand what a chore was particularly. I was like, you seriously are going to devote your considerable intelligence and resources to figuring out who goes to B&Q? This is just ridiculous. And I didn't even understand how much of your life could be determined by being the person with the quotidian duties that had to be done at a particular time. I didn't even understand how that would change who you are and what you are. Why women are so bad at negotiating for themselves in the home, I do not know, because I'm absolutely useless at it. And people always look at me and think I'm the most strident, in-your-face, kind of self-grabby, self-interested person you've ever met. But I negotiate terribly for myself, and I do everything. I mean, I really do. I do literally everything. My husband probably couldn't tell you what their teachers' names are. No, that's really bad. He could tell you what their teachers' names are. My son's in the audience. Don't tell him. Don't tell him I said that. But you know, I don't know why. I used to think it was just because you spend all your working life kind of battling for your rights. You don't want to take that battle home. You don't want to do it every single day. You want some downtime when you're just a nice person. But increasingly, I think that, you know, I am different, and I am different professionally. And the truth of it is, if somebody rang me up and said, "Go and interview Barack Obama tomorrow, you can go first class," and it clashed with the school play, I would say, "No, I'm all right. You know, he looks like an interesting guy, but I can read somebody else doing the interview." So my priorities have changed, and I think it makes me better professionally, because it means I'm much more focused on the things I'm interested in, and I'm much more organised, and I'm better. But I'm not the same, and I don't pretend I am the same. Whereas I think a kind of male professional identity hasn't taken the same hit. So, and that does impact upon how you see yourself and what you're prepared to sacrifice for it.
Yeah, it is really depressing, isn't it, that you know, as you said, that we can be quite sort of forceful and strident and put ourselves forward in our professional lives, but yet, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I don't have anything like an equal division of labour in my own home. And in fact, this is something that, you know, Mumsnet did a survey recently on the chore gap, and it makes such depressing reading. I used to say that they do 10 hours of chores a week, which is half what men do, and I think that's probably a conservative estimate. 70% of mothers are entirely responsible for cooking for the kids, and a similar figure always do the weekly clean. They're overwhelmingly responsible for all the kind of grinding family organisation that keeps the whole thing in motion. 82% of working mums are responsible for arranging childcare and school applications and that kind of thing, and 91% are responsible for organising the dreaded play dates.
I met this really high-powered lawyer once who said that the thing that her husband never did was like the ticker tape. Oh, remember to get so-and-so a birthday present, remember to do this, remember to do that. And she gave up her job the day her husband showed her a picture of their daughter at the school disco, and she was the only one in school uniform. Like, the whole school had their party clothes on except for her daughter, and the guy didn't even realise he'd done anything wrong. So this is like mortified 5-year-old, and he's like, what? She went, didn't she? I picked her up.
Yeah, that's it. Tazeen, I know you have you've talked about a pretty good domestic split with your husband. Tell us how that works and also how it came about.
I think it sort of evolved, actually. It started off with me being mostly in charge because I'm always right. And then it sort of changed to... you can't hear me?
Yeah, go close.
That better? Yeah. It sort of changed once I started to go, I went back to work. And then I had my second child quite soon after and decided to keep working throughout most of that period. And, his career has had quiet moments and his career has had very busy moments. And what we've done so far, we've just been sort of sucking it and seeing it. There's no strategy. There are times where, I'll say we're going to eat fish fingers tonight, and there are many more times where he'll say, no, we're going to eat a home-cooked meal, and then he has to do it. If he wants the home-cooked meal, he's responsible. And there will be days on end, in fact, we've had 3 weeks straight where he's done that, and when it's been my turn, I've just thrown fish fingers in the oven, and that's just the way it has to be. If he wants to do well in his career and I want to do well in mine, this is the only way to negotiate it. And it isn't, in any way, I don't think it's a template for successful, here's how we both do it. But I think he's got to step up, and I think all men have to step up. And we should be teaching, as I'm teaching my sons, as my brothers were taught, as the message I keep sending to my male friends and my male colleagues is that you've got to step up so that women can do what they need to do. And I'm good at what I do. I've been a foreign correspondent. I've traveled around the world covering big stories, and I've only been able to do that because my husband's been at home looking after the kids. And I've sent text messages from Afghanistan saying, don't forget this play date, and don't forget to do their packed lunches. And, in the middle of the night when I've suddenly woken up in a panic. And there have been times where he has forgotten.
What are the benefits to him of doing that? Because we've talked before, and he clearly feels that he is getting some kind of benefit from doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, the emotional health of my children is the most important thing, above and beyond whether we both succeed in our professional lives or not, above and beyond their academic success. And that's quite something from someone who's Asian to say that. But for me, it's their emotional health is the most important thing, and I think I have really emotionally healthy boys because their dad is 50% of the time sharing, his parental duty. So that's why they're doing well, and that's why all dads need to step up, and whatever dads there are in this audience and anybody who will watch this afterwards need to really think about the ways in which they can step into that role.
Eleanor, why are we always on these kind of discussions you have to talk in sort of quite sweeping generalisations, but why aren't enough men stepping up to the plate in terms of that kind of domestic split, the boring, dull stuff that really changes lives, if it's done well?
Well, I'm a bit sympathetic with the men here, actually, which is that I think they will if women let them do it in their own way. I mean, I see so many really over-controlling mothers.
Yeah, like
particularly the kind of quite alpha class kind of, alpha type women who don't want to be any less alpha about being a mother than they are about anything else that they do. And so I think it's also up to women to go, all right, I'm going to let you do it, and I'm going to let you do it your way. Because as we all know, there's nothing worse than being micromanaged in doing it. So if we want fathers to be equal parents, we also have to let them get on with doing it in a dad way. So that may be causing absolute chaos, and it may not be how you do it yourself, but you'll come back and the kids will be really happy. They'll have done some stuff they wouldn't have done with you. It's about exploring different kinds of ways of doing things. So I think women have to be less control freaky about it and let them get on with it. And and I know for myself, because often my husband does have to do that. You know, maybe the dressing up costume for World Book Day isn't precisely what I would have done, but they look cool, you know, and he's done that, and so you have to let the chaps do it their way. So I think there's a bit of that. I think there's also a kind of something weird happens to men. They become quite selfish, I think, sometimes around. They kind of see that there's a get-out clause, that other guys are not doing all the stuff that they're doing. I mean, I've seen really nice men, you know, peers of mine in the office who I was at university with, all that kind of thing, who I've always thought had quite right on views about these things. Hit kind of 45, 2 kids, wife at home, and suddenly, in about 7:30 in the office, they're kind of fiddling around on a few emails that don't really need sending. And you go, aren't you going home? They're going, no, I know exactly when to time it. So I'll get home, the kids will be in bed, supper will be on the table. You know, I'll just go in and give them a kiss. They're all clean. You know, there's none of that horrendous witching hour, getting them into bed or whatever. And I think, well, actually, that's the opposite for me as a working mum. I will race through my day to get out of there so I can get home and see my kids before they go to bed and make sure that they've done their homework and get in the bath with them and have hugs. And that for me is like the kind of often the nicest part of my day. And so I just do think, I think men and women are different in that regard. And to Zoe's point about, you know, the Obama, I mean, I've turned down so many things because I didn't want to, I mean, I'm doing it this week. I was supposed to be going to Dubai, to Abu Dhabi to do a big story. And actually it's my daughter's parents' evening and another one's singing here tomorrow in a choir. And I don't want to miss those things. I think women do make different choices. And when we talk about mothers being on a different career track, it's also because we're massively lucky and privileged to be parents and to be mothers, and I love being a mum. It's my mum who always used to say to me, the world is full of irreplaceable journalists, CEOs, kind of editors. You know, the graveyards are full of all these, you know, indispensable people, and the only people that you're really irreplaceable to is your family, and they're the ones who really care. So I think it does shift your priorities in a humanising way. And, you know, I don't regret that. I feel very lucky to be able to do both. But I also know that between a kind of work thing and a family thing, I'll always choose my family.
Yeah. I love the kind of unspoken men are grumpy angle there.
I don't think I said that, did I? No, but they are. I mean, they are. That's the other thing, is that if you do, like coming here this morning, this is my 3rd WOW panel in 3 days, and I was on the BBC this morning doing the newspapers. So when I slunk out at about 8 a.m, my husband was serving breakfast to 8 members of my family, because my sister's staying with her kids and her husband. And I was like, bye, darling, you know, I'm off to talk about motherhood, who just raised his eyebrows and was like, yeah, right, we're doing a lot of that this weekend.
Victoria,
so, you know, there are choices.
Eleanor talked about a kind of maternal gatekeeping, you know, particularly I think in the first few months of your baby's life. And I really remember myself definitely being guilty of that and of really quite dismissing my other half's parenting and seeing it as a kind of land grab in some respects. And I was at a stage when I was really uncertain about how my career was going to go. I'd been a freelancer. Suddenly, you know, it just fell off a cliff because, like Eleanor, I couldn't be in the editing suite at 3 a.m. Do you recognise this? And do you have sympathy for some of the reasons that women, maybe because of, well, obviously because of broader structural problems, might feel that even though it's disadvantaging them, they have to kind of cling to motherhoodness?
Yes, I think very much so. In my job, I'm the main earner in our relationship, and my job's changed recently because the company I work for was bought by another company, and I have to commute several times a week, and I don't get to put the children to bed because I have to start late and leave late. And my partner's taken over quite a lot of that. And, you know, it was the other weekend, my partner went away, and me and my sons, you know, we went to the cinema, we went out to Pizza Hut, they got their bikes out for the first time. And he came back and he was like, oh, it looks like they've had lots of fun. It's like a divorced dad's weekend. And I was like really offended, because it's like, I'm not like this divorced dad who hardly sees the kids. And he thought it was a bit of a joke, but it was, And I've also found when I had my first kids, there wasn't the option of shared parental leave. And we talk about, oh, it'd be really great if we could do that. But now with this pregnancy, there is. And he's been talking about that. But there is a bit of me that thinks, no, it's my leave. You know, I want that leave to me and the baby. And I do feel quite protective of it because I feel it's part of my relationship with the baby. And I think it's part of my status as a mother. And then I think, am I perpetuating the same old traditional values? But it's really difficult to negotiate. And I think and that's even me and my partner, I think we have quite an equal relationship, but I think it could be even more problematic in relationships where things aren't so equal and perhaps where one partner's more controlling, and how do you negotiate that balance? It's really difficult.
I think you grit your teeth and you suck it up. You know, we are women, we hold our rage in our teeth. We just have to, we have to hand the responsibility over to the men and just not think about what's happening at home. And eventually they'll figure it out. There have been many days where I've called, and in fact, often he forgets to pick the kids up from school.
No.
Yeah.
Often, because he's in a meeting. And I'll get a call filming or working in the middle of something else from the school saying, there's nobody here. The kids then know that it's their dad coming to pick them up. And they just go straight into the after-school club. And you know, I go home and I've scolded him so many times that now I just sort of pelt him with tomatoes. Yeah. Sorry?
Does he get there eventually? I mean, have they ever actually been left at school all night?
Yeah, and often he's late, and I think that's another thing. But in order for me to be able to do what I do, I just have to just suck that up.
I really recognise that point about the control freak, because I don't even think of myself as a control freak. I don't control anything else. I'm always late myself, but my husband and I sometimes work from home at the same time, and one time he was due to pick the kids up, and I could see the time click, like, and the school is like 6 minutes away from the house, and it hit 3:30, and I'd been not saying anything for 15 minutes, and I went, go and get the kid, and he kind of went, oh yeah, and like tore out the house. And then he came back going, I wasn't even last. And I was going, oh.
That's because Tazeen's husband was last.
We should get them together.
Yeah.
But just a bit of perspective on that. My mum always worked, and she never picked me up from school. And I really minded about that. I wanted her to be there. Everyone else's mums were there, and she wasn't.
Yeah, me too,
so as a working mum myself, I've made massive efforts to make sure that I can pick them up sometimes. I always pick them up on a Monday, and I try and pick them up on another day. And usually, because I've kind of done 25 million things before getting there, I'm late, And so I get there, and I'm thinking, you have no idea the sacrifices I've made to be here at 3:45. Okay, I'm 10 minutes late, but you should have been like, wow, all day. And they're like, oh, Mum, you're late, and you don't have a snack. All the other mums have got a snack, and they're there sitting in their car, and they're taking them off, and I'm useless. And I'm thinking, well, so you can never get it right. That's me making a massive effort for something that I felt was a lack myself. And I do sometimes feel kind of a bit resentful of what I call the slave mothers, who are the kind of mothers who don't work, who are sitting there in their 4x4s with their oatcakes in a perfect plastic bag, and they've had nothing to do all day but get the oatcakes ready. So, and then the children are going, you can see them slightly going, God, I wish I had a slave mother.
I know.
I find often their children are a bit annoying.
Moving on, let's talk about the workplace. So the burden for caring for children means that women are, as we've discussed already, massively disadvantaged in the workplace in a way that fathers just aren't. So another Mumsnet survey found that 84% of mothers feel that having children has made it harder to progress in their career. Tazeen, you've talked already, but have you felt pressure to plough forward in your career whilst frantically juggling mothering? You've got a slightly terrifying story about immediately after the birth of your second child, I think.
Yeah. I think that I've been offered really exciting opportunities, and most times I've tried to make it work. And there have been times where I've just had to turn down full-time jobs that require working in a high-profile news position, because I know that I'll be home at 11 o'clock at night, which means I won't see my kids. I'll have a small window just in the morning where I probably won't be paying attention because I'll be reading the newspapers and listening to the news. So I've had to turn a lot of that kind of thing down and instead make my professional life work in a different way. But when my second child was born, just before he was born, 2 months before, Channel 4, I'd been working on this series every year, and they said, we're now going to take this series to Jerusalem, and we need to do it exactly around 6 weeks after the birth of your second child. And I thought, how do I make this work? And I really wanted to do it. They would have found somebody else. Of course, I'm easily irreplaceable, and they could have found somebody else to do it. But they said, we'd like to give you, the opportunity to see how you can make it work. And, I just sort of pulling my hair out, thinking, how can I make this pregnancy go away? And then I sort of thought, well, actually, and they didn't really offer this option, but they made it work. I said, well, if I can bring somebody with me to look after the baby while I'm filming and things, would that work for you? And they said, yes, we can make that work. So I initially asked my mother-in-law, who said no. And then I asked that's the woman who raised the son who forgets to pick up his kids. And then I found a nanny, a friend recommended, who would look after the baby while I was filming. And so I would we were in Jerusalem, and, every day was filming with all these men. And in the middle of it, baby, 6 weeks old, needed a breastfeed. So he'd come into the room, and I'd cover myself up in my shawl and feed him, and he would slurp and burp and fart, and everybody knew I was breastfeeding under this shawl. And for me, as a Pakistani Muslim female, that was really quite a leap. But I made it work. And during the night, the nanny said, I'll have him, and I said, no, I need to have him. So I was like, completely and utterly sleepless, but I made it work.
Zoe, what does the broader landscape of work for women look like? I mean, not everyone works as a freelancer. Lots of women. So,
I mean, the thing is, I think the problem is because we concentrate a lot on kind of high-powered women, because those are the really obvious metrics of like where they're missing. So it's really obvious that there are kind of missing women in in executive roles, and it's really obvious that there are 1 million women missing from the workforce, which was the Resolution Foundation finding. It's really obvious that, when you go into a meeting, you're often the only woman there, and all of those things are kind of very noticeable. And they also seem quite they seem like quite obvious pressure points, because, everybody, these are intelligent people, they should be able to discuss what's going on and what's going on in the kind of missing corners. I mean, my worry with all that is that we don't really tell a true story about the normal life of women who aren't high profile and who aren't very high achieving, but they still have to work. There's an awful lot of work that goes on in non-achieving areas. And there, I think, is really stark, because basically there are some figures in the lowest quintile. I think 78% of mothers go back to work after 4 months just because they can't afford to live on the statutory minimum. So they're not taking anything like their full entitlements. They're not using all this legislation because they can't afford to. And so in tandem with that, you have this really growing kind of fetishization of the bonded parent, which is really focused on having the year with your baby and taking as much time as you possibly can and not ceding too much to the dad and all the rest of it. And we're kind of valorizing, in a way, a lifestyle, a kind of parenting ideal, which a lot of people actually can't afford. And the danger of that is that we end up seeing middle-class parenting as like inherently more loving than working-class parenting, which, everybody knows is bullshit. Yeah. And that's what I really worry about. But, obviously the executive experience is really problematic as well. And I think it's 85% of Mumsnet readers say that their workplace is no good for women after they've had children. It is not making the effort that they think it needs to make. So, obviously that is a story, but I think it's a story that we need to see in the round.
Absolutely. There's obviously been, a raft of family-friendly initiatives over the last 15 years, which clearly haven't made the kind of differences that they were intended to make. And the latest is the right to shared parental leave. I don't know if you all know about that. That came into force a couple of weeks ago. And it means that after the first 2 weeks, first 2 weeks after birth, parents can decide to split what would have been paid maternity leave between the two of them. So in theory, a mother could go back to work after the first 2 weeks. Her partner could take on childcare for the remaining 37 weeks. So how important is it, Zoe, that fathers get that chance to be with their... Is it crucial? Do you think it's important that fathers are involved in actual childcare, right from the very beginning?
I think it's much more important than... Michael Lewis, the guy who writes about banking, but also wrote one thing about fatherhood, which was really interesting, said, how did I go from that person in the hospital who knew theoretically that they were meant to care, they were meant to love this baby, to the person 6 months in who actually did love the baby? How did I go from that person to that person who would have thrown himself under an ice cream truck for the child? And he kind of concludes that it's the act of caring for the baby that teaches you how to care for the baby. It's actually not a hormonal pathway, or for some people it is, but it isn't for everybody. And it's not it's not a learnt behavior. It's the act of it that makes it happen. And that, I think, is really critical, because obviously dads do have a relationship with their children, however hands-on they are, you know, and children have a relationship with their dads even if they're never around. And, you know, the idea that kids don't have a relationship with their dads because they never see them is wrong. They have a relationship. It's just a really bad relationship. We've got questions. Anyway, but there is
questions till the end.
There is. I nevertheless think that, you know, you don't get the kind of intimacy that parenting is, that makes it worth it if you don't have the time. You can't make it up in later years. You can't it's not like a pension. You can't throw a load of it in later on when you're earning more. You have to do it piece by piece by piece.
Victoria, do you agree with that?
Yes, very much so. I think it's very important that fathers are around and that they're doing things and that they're with the baby, and that it's understood that fatherhood is a relationship. It's not just status. I think so often we talk about motherhood in terms of self-sacrifice, in terms of work, and we talk of fatherhood in terms of being a role model or being someone to look up to, and that's quite a distancing image. And you know, it's these images of maybe kicking a ball around in the park, but not sort of washing dirty nappies and not actually getting your hands stuck in. And I think it's really important to get them doing that in order to really understand what it's about, and also to stop having this sort of romanticised image of the mother role, and so that they understand that we don't magically have this kind of understanding of how to change nappies and how to do this and how to do that, and you're just better at it because you're female. That they understand that for us it's work as well, and for us it doesn't always come naturally either.
And that we go through the same learning to care. That, you know, as Zoe says, caring comes from caring. You develop that. You know, I remember I was in love, but I didn't automatically understand. Something grew from doing it.
I remember leaving the hospital and thinking, I can't believe they've let me just walk out of here. Like, they haven't done any checks just because I happened to give birth. Yeah. They've just let me walk out with a baby, and it's just...
Can I just say something about the shared parental leave? I think the problem with it, I mean, it's obviously a fantastic thing, and it's sends the right message and it's a move in the right direction. But the problem is that if the message in society is that looking after your kids as a man is emasculating, if the widespread message in society through the government, in terms of government policy as well as what we see on the ground in boardrooms, those men aren't taking that time off. How likely are they to take that time off? How likely are they to be the ones to go, okay, I'll take half of that time off and take the risk that comes with the impact it has on my career?
Eleanor,
can I come in on
absolutely.
That? What I actually think is one of the main fault lines at the moment I see in my office is between the older men, the kind of baby boomer generation who absolutely did not take any parental leave, who kind of see being a real kind of macho man in the office as kind of leaving all of that to their wives who are at home, and a new generation of much younger men who are saying, my wife is also working, I want to be there for my baby, I want to take this time off. And I think sometimes women now do get some kind of special treatment around this in most workplaces now. You can ask for flexible work, there will be some kind of boons given. And I actually think that it's really hard for the younger men to ask these older men for something that they haven't done, because they're basically saying to them, I don't want to be the kind of man that you have been. I saw that really clearly. A really lovely colleague of mine having to really stand up to a big boss and say, you haven't seen your children, you've been editing at the Sunday Times till midnight every Saturday night. I don't want to be that kind of dad. I want a different kind of job, and I want to be home so that I can see them in the evening. And I think that is a real battle going on within men. And a lot of the men who are ambitious think there's only one way to do it, which is to be like these dinosaur baby boomer chaps have been. And that's not necessarily the way. So I think as women, we have to really support those younger men who are asking for the things that we've now got.
I think it's fascinating as well, because just as you say, those men are kind of saying something negative to their kind of mentors. That problem exists in feminism as well, that we're saying something to older feminists about not wanting to be the kind of feminists they were, because
not wanting to be the kind of mothers they were. I remember some of my bosses when I was a young woman. I remember I had a boss at the Telegraph and she used to read her children a bedtime story down the telephone line, and they would wave goodnight to the winking light of the Canary Wharf Tower. And I can remember looking at her and thinking, I do not want to be that kind of mother. I mean, I don't care what effect it has on my career. That is not where I'm going. As a boss and as an older woman, I've tried to model for the younger women around me a different way of doing it. And that's I think that's also a responsibility that we have. It's a very interesting piece on the internet at the moment in The Atlantic by a woman who's now older talking about what a cow she was to women who were mothers in her 20s. And how she would kind of look at them and think, oh, you know, they're useless, they're lazy, they've got to leave at 5 o'clock, they're not committed. And now, of course, she's in that situation herself and she understands. So I think also, I mean, in all these things, we have to be a lot more understanding to people who are in different kinds of situations. And I think younger women need to wise up that they're not going to be immune to this, that we haven't, it's kind of every woman who becomes a mother kind of has to reinvent the wheel for herself because it has not been sorted.
Many of these sort of parenting, family-friendly policies, it's obviously something that government's putting a huge amount of effort into and resources into is getting women back into economic productivity. But Victoria, do you think we're missing something possibly in when we talk about gender equality in parenting? There is this relentless focus on economic productivity. Are we in danger of losing some other things? Is that the right question that we're asking, that we're trying to solve?
I think there are times that it feels like the focus is not on equality and not on improving things for families, but on making sure that women are good little cogs in the capitalist machinery and just sort of get back to work, get on with it, we'll make it And I think it's very difficult that at the moment, on the one hand, there are all these proposals with shared parental leave and talking about asking for flexible working. But on the other hand, I think for many people, the actual conditions of their work have got a lot more difficult with things like 0 hours contracts and inflexible hours and shift work, and some people earning so little they have to work 2 jobs. And these things are quite incompatible. We have to look at how we see work overall, not just look at mothers as a subset of work and kind of think about how we can make it so that everyone is in a situation to it. And I think it links into what you were saying about not everyone being a freelance and not everyone having these 9-to-5 jobs. And
well, I did a piece once about Barnet Council, I think it was, offering 24-hour childcare, and it was meant to be like this kind of brave new world where you could get childcare at 2 a.m. But actually, what it was linked to was getting people available for shifts that they didn't know when they were coming, shifts that were antisocial hours. It was basically getting mothers available for work that actually wasn't appropriate if you're a parent, that you couldn't do. And you have to think at some point, what is the point of getting everybody economically active? What is a society that can't allow some people to be inactive for a period of time? But the only people, weirdly, politically, the only people who can conceive of parents as anything other than economic units that are either maximised or unutilized, are like really hard right, bizarro kind of mothers at home matter type things, or they're kind of really hard left Greens. And there's nobody in between making any acknowledgement of the fact that you might want to be with your children sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think that's what we're saying about mums and working, isn't it? That actually, as a mother, you do sometimes make a choice about family before work, however much you love your work. And that maybe we're all kind of going, oh, robots are going to take away all these jobs and do all this work. Maybe we should be using that extra time to spend some time with our children and, love them and put value on things which are not just economic.
Well, that's what Marx would say, Eleanor, but I don't know if the Sunday Times will like that.
Yeah, I'm the honorary lefty.
Well, unsurprisingly, we haven't managed to solve what is obviously a kind of fairly intractable problem with roots that go very deep and tendrils that sort of spread out into all aspects of women's lives. But we've come up with some areas of interest. Before we go to questions from the audience, should we all just say, where would you start? Eleanor, where would you start? What's the most important thing that we need to solve, that we need to start with in order to kind of get things moving forwards again?
Well, I think society needs to make it a kind of shameful thing to be a man who isn't a hands-on dad. I mean, I think, we talk about kind of shaming.
Yeah,
I mean,
shaming.
the shaming of men who don't step
On
up to the
Twitter.
plate.
They need to
Yeah, on the domestic front, in terms of, I mean, what you were saying about we used to say the heave, the heaving the buggy, heaving the baby up the stairs. The heave is the love, and if you don't do that, then,
I like that.
yeah, the heave is the love. And that men have to understand that too, that it's not good enough to be you can't be a dad, there's no such thing as being a hands-off dad. That is not being a dad.
It would be great, wouldn't it, if fathers judged themselves on their fathering in the way that mothers relentlessly judge themselves on their mothering.
Well, maybe we need to start judging them if they're not judging each other.
Tazeen.
And I think that comes from government policy. I think that comes from government policy, and I think that comes from messages in society, and that comes from us all doing the work we do and writing those pieces about men and getting men to write pieces about themselves. And also, stuff around childcare that's creative and sort of finds a way of working around our lives in the way that I think all four of us work, and that's affordable and high quality. I mean, this is nothing new, but why are we still having these conversations about childcare so many years on? It's depressing. And it's stopping women from contributing to the economy in the way that we can, just because at this moment in time, government doesn't see the point in spending that kind of money in terms of ensuring that we can get to work and our children are well taken care of. That needs to change.
Victoria.
I think as well we need to kind of understand that caring work is work. It's not just some kind of natural experience that women have. And I think it gets put on women so much, and that because they're just assumed to have this natural role. I think it's to do with stereotypes that we impose on children from a really early age. And it doesn't just happen with childcare, it also happens with elder care and care of sick people. It's always falling on women, and it's always invisibilised because we kind of assume that's just part of being a woman, and not that it really is hard work, and that it has a real social value and it has an economic value, and everyone benefits from it. So it's not becoming less useful because you've had children. If anything, it's becoming more.
Yeah. Zoe.
I like all of that, and I would really go with the shame and the childcare and the kind of conceiving of care as work. But I do think we need to really watch what's happening to wages and workplace rights, because it's not just at the bottom they're stagnating everywhere, right up into the top 10th. Indeed, even at the top, apart from at the very, very top, wages aren't really going anywhere, and workplace rights are going very, very fast downhill with 0 hours contracts and with paid-for employee tribunals. All of this stuff is going to turn into a very dangerous picture for women, because you are necessarily more vulnerable and less reliable if you're trying to give birth. And we've really got to watch it and not think that the status quo is stuck, because I think the status quo is actually getting worse.
Yeah. That's great. So there's so much that we haven't talked about. We haven't looked at things from a non-heterosexual perspective. We talked a little bit about class. We haven't talked about stay-at-home mothers. We haven't talked about different cultural and ethnic backgrounds. It's a huge subject. But I hope that was a useful and stimulating discussion, even though we didn't manage to, get to everything. Just to sort of end on a slightly more positive note, although I don't feel that this is an entirely negative discussion. Mumsnet did yet another survey about feminism, and a huge number of Mumsnet users feel that they are much more likely to end up sort of self-identifying as a feminist, having come across the site and used it, and also to look at how things are done in the home from a feminist perspective after using the site. So if you don't know Mumsnet, please do come along and check us out, because it's a very kind of useful site. Thank you very much to. Thank you
useful for creating feminists.
Useful. Thank you very much to our panel, to Zoe, to Victoria, to Tazeen, and to Eleanor. And thank you all for coming along and participating.